Welcome to Puck Talk CS. I'm Chives, Matthew Mugno, alongside Steve Murno. Steve, man, so much good for the New York Rangers, the draft, free agency. Today's episode, we just want to talk free agency, man. And, Steve and I, we're like, our real listeners, our loyal ones, we started this at like age 14, like pre-podcast era. We've been lucky enough to stay in the game and have our little following, which we greatly appreciate. But it's funny with full time stuff now. You and I working hard. We find our spots to record. I don't get to talk to Steve as much, so this is the first time I'm getting to hear all your opinions. You're hearing mine. I love that for the show and our listeners. So I'm ready to tear this open when you are.
Let's do it. And the one thing that I love, and you're gonna see since our last episode, what's up, y'all? The energy's a little bit different, starting to change. I said this offline to Matt before we started, but like I'm pumped, but I'm also happy that like we're not previewing games in another 2-3 weeks. Like last season was so emotionally bad. Like
It was.
I'm still not ready for the season to start, but I'm excited. There's something refreshing about these moves. And what I love, back to your opening, is that we started this when we were 14, over 10 years ago, almost coming up.
Yeah.
But that same passion is still there. So let's bring it and let's talk some puck, baby. Where you want to start? Raw emotion. Let's go.
We got to start with, let's start with like, it's 9 o'clock free agency day. Steve, because of his job, I know you can't look at like, everything online, you caught up. But the start of the day, every team was fearing the tampering. Like every GM knows, and Friedman said this on Chicklets last week, like every general manager knew that they were in a position, if they had talked about things before, they did not want to get a tampering penalty from the league. The league was looking to punish. So the first hour or two was pretty quiet. And this was already a free agent class that wasn't heavy. And with that, I think that's where the Rangers started off on the right foot. So, Steve, let's talk Gabby. The Rangers bring in Gavrikov from LA. I've liked his games. I really feel like what put him on the map was that 5 overtime game against Tampa in the bubble years ago when he was in Columbus. And his underlying metrics, his numbers have all gone up since then. And he was kind of tied to an anchor of a defense in LA, aging, some young guys. He's going to come here and be Adam Fox's complement. I really like the move. There are a few guys over the course of time, Steve, that I was like, I really hope the Rangers acquire that player at some point in their prime. And we've seen a few. I think one of them, of course, Patrick Kane, Vladimir Tarasenko, they were just childhood favorites. Ryan Reeves in that enforcer role after the whole Tom Wilson thing. And this move really does feel settling after the Ryan Lindgren departure. So, Steve, Gavrikov, he's really great at poke checks, really good at zone entry defense. And I think that's something the Rangers desperately needed at a contract that was not going to blow them out of the water.
Yeah, this is something that we all knew was the biggest, glaring need on this roster coming into this off season. And I knew the expectation was high. And I think partly, it was foolish to think that we were going to go in and make a big splash, get an Aaron Ekblad, go after a Sam Bennett, yeah, who wouldn't want these types of players? But I think this is the move that I think the Rangers, I think the Rangers equivalent to signing, a Sam Bennett. This was because this is what we needed. When you look at us and look at why we struggled last year, for me, play starts in our own zone. And last year we were bad. When it come down to it, I don't have the specific stats in front of me, but we were, definitely top 5 in, giving up high danger goals in our own defensive zones, and we were very sloppy. And of course, Keandre Miller, we'll get to him in a second. He's solely not to blame, all in that category. But a move like this, I think, solidifies us. And of course, Gavrikov is coming off his best season with the Kings, I think. And I think he's gonna, I'm willing to see him pan out with Fox, on the top defensive pairing. I think
Fox needs it.
He does. He really does. After the last few seasons we had, I remember not last year, but 2 years ago, I was saying next year, Adam Fox really needs to have a good year. And quite frankly, didn't really pan out. And I'm going to say the same thing. Like, he can't bust again, and I think with adding Gavrikov next to him, I think this frees up Fox a little bit to get more in the rush, to skate, to control the puck, because we all know that Gavrikov, if you're familiar with him, people listening, he's the type of player that's going to stay behind defensively, and I think that style is more, it's going to help the Rangers control the game defensively, and also maybe hopefully unlock Adam Fox, and I think that first mentality, especially for a first pairing, is going to help, and it's going to alleviate the burden for Adam Fox, and I think that's the main priority, in this move. So I love it. This was a great move. If you had to give this a grade, or maybe not a grade, but just overall, I'm sure you're in agreement. This is a good move, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great move because I also think that the major factor is 7x7. This was not 8.5. When eventually you will likely have to move this contract, right? We know the reality of this. We've seen the rodeo. It's going to be a little bit easier to stomach that than 8.5. And before that, there was some speculation. Does it go above that? You don't want to pay that out for a stay-at-home D-man, but you have this defender in his prime. So I think you're gonna get hopefully a few good years of this with Fox. And like you said, Steve, like Fox, he went knee on knee in that Capital series. He already sustained an injury in 23-24. He never had in his hockey career up until that point. And it felt like the playoff led to exactly what we saw last year. And for me, Fox doesn't have to be an offensive defender, but he's really good two-way, and we know that, right? Like he was putting up the closest to Leach numbers we've seen, and you want that trend to continue, especially from the back end. Steve, something that does concern me though on the back end overall is you add Gavrikov, but with Miller's departure, there's going to be a dip in the offensive capabilities, I think, from that back end. And granted, that might be way down the list of aspects to this team or that need to be fixed or weaknesses, but the Miller trade to me was probably Drury's best move of the day. That's what I would say because Gavrikov seemed like the no-brainer. They were pursuing him for a while, and he even said to the reporters today, Drury did. This is from Vince. Drury didn't hold back about his defensive concerns. It starts in our D zone. The D zone coverage, defending, certainly defending in the high danger areas. And he continued to say that we have to be better in our own zone. We have to be better in front of Shesty and Quickie. And to me, that's the mindset that shows up every single day. So Drury was well aware of that. Miller, man, I want to hear your thoughts on the Keandre trade.
Yeah. First of all, I'll to wrap up put the bow on that on your last thought there. I'll take, yeah, Miller did have that offensive capabilities, but I'll take, taking that offensive capability out and losing Keandre Miller if we're able to add, and be a little bit more sense of stability defensively with Gavrikov in there. I'll totally take that every day, and I think any Ranger fan will. And last thing I have on him is that the thing that I like is I'm hearing that he took less money because he wants to be a New York Ranger and he wants to be here. I love that. Like that's something I really want to see from a player. Like I want somebody that wants to be here, because when you look at our team last year, there was a lot of performances on our team that guys look like they didn't want to, let alone be here in New York, but they didn't even want to play hockey. So that's something that I want to see. And hopefully, if you're willing to, like you said, the great deal, if you're willing to come in here and take a little bit less more money and just to come with us, like I think that's going to translate or hopefully translate to results. So I'm happy with that. That has me thrilled. Keandre Miller, man, wow. This caught me totally off surprise. Not that Keandre Miller was traded, but the fact of what we got in return. And I was also so surprised. Carolina, 8 years, was it 60 million? Was it 60 million? That's a
Yeah, I think
lot,
it's eight.
man.
I believe it's 8x7.
It was
Say,
it's
but
crazy.
he's certainly paid on potential, which I think is like certainly questionable on Carolina's end.
Yeah, but that makes you think. Did Carolina think they were getting JT Miller instead of Keandre Miller? Like, I mean, but
Yeah,
anyway,
7.5 mil a year. So, and he got 8 years because it was a sign and trade. So remember that they changed that in the next CBA. So Miller is one of those last 8 year contracts that we'll see, and then until the next CBA.
it's still a highly risky move. Like, I think we could both agree on that in terms of the Hurricanes. But I think in the simplest of
And
terms,
that's
right?
felt like Keandre's whole time, even in New York, felt like this. Like, what are we getting today?
2 years ago, well, that was 3 years ago, the 2022 season, the one where we made it to Eastern Conference Finals against Tampa, that was a really good year for Keandre Miller. That playoffs was really good. Him
Mhm.
and Truba, without them, we don't come back in that Pittsburgh series, and we certainly don't win that Carolina series. But ever since Keandre Miller, and I'll never forget this, I was watching this. It was a Sunday night game. Ever since Keandre Miller spit on Drew Doughty, I mean, his career in New York just completely fell off, and the mistakes, the playoffs 2 years ago was Keandre Miller. I mean, that was really the first writing on the wall that was just terrible, and he was never really able to recoup from that defensively. And I think he would score every now and then, but I think I speak for all Ranger fans that scoring really meant nothing because the defensive performance was really bad. Yeah, the potential's there. I still think he's there. What is he, 25?
Yeah,
And I still think he's got more left in the tank. Coaching, whatever you want to chalk it up to, it just wasn't there in New York, man. So I'm glad we won this trade. I mean, Jury, this was a masterclass. This might be Jury's. I think this is Jury's best move that he's made in New York.
you
Because
think so?
really, I think what we got in return, I think to me is astounding. Like I would have thought, we would have got way less. Maybe Carolina was like, you know what, this is a guy that we could get, long term right now, young guy. We think he could fit in and be a strong piece. And I'm honestly surprised that Carolina went for this. I think when you look at what Carolina needs, I think they need a little help. What is it? They need a couple. They need a little work on the bottom six. They need a second center for that second line now. But listen, they think it fits. They think it fits. Good for them. I think we got away with one here. What do you think?
Yeah, it unfortunately feels like someone when they're sledding, and then you see like a little kid running. And what you mentioned is like the 2024 playoffs felt like that, where it was like that first, like, oh no, this might not go as well as we thought. Because in 22-23 was his breakout. He had 39 points, his career high. That was the same season with the Dowdy spit, and I think he had like a 1 game suspension or fine.
Yeah.
But that year he was electric. He was doing it on both ends. He was carrying the
In the
puck
beginning of the year, he
like
was.
Makar light. Yeah,
Yep,
I,
he
I
was.
think the you know what, I see both sides to this though, and I think where not a concern lies, but the truth is, I think they paid him on potential, which was not an intelligent move. I think they had to pivot from their original plan. They signed Stankoven. They're looking at Ehlers. They still don't have another game breaker, which is, I think, what they really needed. I don't think this free agency class really, like, Mitch Marner was probably the only playmaker that they would go for. The reports were that there was a deal in place for that. If you saw any of that, Steve-O, like Marner's wife was pregnant, didn't want to go to Vegas. But apparently the move was to Vegas, not to Carolina. Anyway, with all that stated, with Miller specifically, I see the potential though. Like, I think they put the money first. They put the what is that? They put the cart before the horse, right? That's just the
Mhm.
phrase. But at the same time, I do see where Keandre Miller, like, he'll always have flaws in his game, right? That's the same way I feel about Brady Shea. But I think Miller has a higher offensive ceiling. He has the size, he's got the reach, he's got the skating ability. The one thing he doesn't have is instinct. He's not an instinctive defenseman because that's not how he played the game his entire life. In fact, he didn't pick up hockey until later. He wasn't a hockey focused athlete until later. He is the definition of an athlete who plays hockey. I don't think he has that, the hockey IQ of some of the top players in the league, or defenders. I still think he could be in that upper echelon, but I think that'll always hold him back a little bit. And we see gaps in his defensive game, literally on the ice, where he loses the gap. So, I think essentially you sign Gavrikov and you trade Miller. One, you have to believe that, Steve, I think you'll agree with this point. If you're going to trade a player in division, you better believe that they're not going to become what you think they can.
Oh yeah, you're the biggest proponent of that. I know you. So yeah, I agree with that.
Right? Like you can't let a player go to a team that you could see in the semifinal or conference final.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm okay with it being Keandre Miller. What do you like? I'm assuming you, based on what you said, I'm guessing that you agree with me that you're okay with it. Like I'm okay with him going to Carolina. I don't know. He just what I've seen from him the last 2 years. I mean, he's just I'm okay with him going over there and being sloppy. Yeah, why not?
Because it is like his whole I just feel like even in his time in New York, it felt like a gamble. Not when he was drafted, like not when he made the team at a training camp. That was a surprise. But it felt like since that 23 year, like everything's just been this toss up. Like, what's 79 going to play like tonight? And I think you're right. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm okay with it, but your weariness is warranted. I'm okay with it because look what Kako went over to Seattle and now it was destroying it.
Change the
He
scenery.
look at Jack Roslovic, in Carolina himself. What was it in like 20 games? He had like 30 goals or something absurd, and dude couldn't muster up one goal
I
when
think
he
it was
was with
like
us.
44 points in his
Yeah,
like however many games he was there.
yeah, some
So
crap
I
like
I could
that.
pull that up in a moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Steve, you know what concerns me too? And we're going to talk about the lineup later in this epi too, folks. 2017 to 2019, the rebuild, Gorton era, not a single first rounder from 2017 to 19. The only remaining is the final draft, which I have pumped out online all the time for my followers. They draft Loff, Cooley, Schneider, Rempe. Uh, I believe they drafted one more guy in that 2020 draft. So like that stays, but that's really the only thing the Rangers have to show for. Like all those guys now with Miller gone are gone.
Yeah, it's sad. You want to go back all the way to 2017. Yeah, Heedle, Miller, Kako. It just up and down the list. I could sit here and name you like 10 other guys. It's just it gets to a point where it's like enough is enough. And Jury did a great job in a master class getting a first and second pick. But does it really matter if you can't develop guys and you go out and you get your next first round pick and it's just a bad pattern? You mentioned Brendan Othman, a couple minutes ago. He's another one that we're nowhere near there yet, but it just begs the question, when you keep falling off the bicycle, when is it gonna be enough to not fall off the bike? And we're way past, the training wheels on some of these guys, Lafreniere you just mentioned. So it's so tough,
And he got his bag.
and he got his bag, and I don't know. It makes me want to rip my hair out. I don't know why we can't develop guys, man. It's just I can't
Yeah, like
fathom the
where
process
I'm
of it.
concerned is not Miller. It's that, like you said, Brady Shea was traded to Carolina for a first rounder that we then drafted Braden Schneider with. And now is Braden Schneider, like, if he doesn't do great this year on the third pairing, are we going to be in a situation where we felt all year with Miller last year and in the playoffs? Like, is this is this going to be the end of the road? Like, are they not going to extend him for the long term, for a bridge, for a 4 year? Like, that's the one thing I do. I'm 100% with you on that.
Good. I'm glad. And listen, it's not just this trade. It's just as an organization moving forward, I don't have the confidence that I would like to have in this team, evaluating this moving forward, especially as we have a lot of young guys that'll be coming up in a couple of years, and this year, and even this next year, as we look and see Edstrom and Rempe, what is this development cycle like? And I think, even without that conversation, I still think let's break this trade down even more. I think what made this trade were these two premium picks. I think you have a first round and a second round. I think for Keandre Miller, I think it boggles my mind. Yeah, I can't believe that we pulled that off. I really can't. And how about I want to get your opinion on this. Uh, this kid's name Morrow that we got defensively, right?
Yeah.
He is. I think he's Carolina's top prospect. So
Hmm.
I don't know if you know a little bit more about him, if you want to speak to him about that, speak on him. But I think he might have a chance next year. I'd be interested in seeing what he can do. What do you got for us on him?
All right. So obviously, Zach Jones was signed by Buffalo. The Rangers did not extend a qualifying offer to him. That is all its own separate thing. Um, but Morrow, the conversation around another Hockey East product defensive prospect is that he is offensive. He's creative. He really can move the puck. He's got two engines. He's got a motor, legs pump like uh, V9, V12. But the knock on his game is defense, and that's obviously where the Rangers want to improve. And we've also seen the road that Zach Jones had to take being a similar player from the same system from UMass. So I'm interested to see. I think he'll be the extra defender this year. I confidently can say that. I'd love to see him take someone's spot in the lineup, though, just because you want to see a guy that you feel like has a little more of a runway than Vakanainen.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think for a right shot defenseman, I think he could easily step into this lineup and be have a third line role with us next year. And from what it sounds like, he needs a little bit more work on his defensive game. And I think that was a little evident when he played um in the playoffs this year. But I think offensively, there might be something there. So I am willing to explore that a little bit more. It's exciting, but I still think if there's one thing that worries me with this team, and actually I'll because I know you're gonna ask me later on in the episode. I'll save this little tangent not to deviate. So
All right, we'll kick that later. I know what you're gonna. I know. I want to talk
I know
about
you
a
know.
guy that has actually exceeded every single expectation from the organization to the fan base. Will Cooley, highest paid New York Ranger on a second contract. The highest, I believe, Vince on his podcast, I think it's called New Ice City, something like that.
Ooh.
Vince Bercagliano, USA Today reporter, stated that the only highest outside of that he could find recently was Adam Fox. He wins the Norris. He gets paid 9.5 on his second deal off his entry level. Outside of that, Buchnevich, low deal. VC, low deal. Bless you, Steve.
Oh,
So yeah, Will Cooley comes in at 3.9. I think this is great. He is Matty Nyes light. He does so much impact hitter. It's not just to hit. It's not just to instigate. It's precision hitting. It's separating man from puck at the right time. Surpass Ryan Callahan's single season record. I think he brings everything, and I think this deal bodes well for a team that is going to be upping his contract likely when the cap goes up, when that cap ceiling goes up, and they're going to need that time to get some more money off the books. I think.
yeah. I can't agree with you more. What do you think I was gonna say? I disagree with you. I love the deal. I think
Yeah,
this or Cooley it really has emerged as the prime example of what Curry wants more of on this team. He's a hardworking, straight ahead, physical, skilled, player, and I think you saw that. He's willing to do whatever it takes, and I think you saw that last year. Whether scoring, what he had 20 plus goals,
20
uh,
goals.
20 goals, whether it was his points or even, with the Rangers record in hits, I think in all elements of his game, you just saw him elevate and take take it to the next level. And not only that, I also, you know, the thing I love about this hockey is there's just certain things that you can't statify and as in terms of a stat on paper. But for me, watching these horrible games, every time the Rangers would give up a goal and momentum shifted, for me, Will Cooley was the one that was coming back and scored right away and kind of shifted that momentum back to us. And yeah, we were so shit. It was too much for us to handle. But games like that Columbus game in Columbus where we were up to nothing, and then Columbus comes back and takes the 3-2 lead, and they score like 2 goals in like 2 minutes before half. And Will Cooley, right before the half, scores a goal to get the game tied. It was moments like those stepping up, when we needed him to be clutch. And those are the things that you can't statify that I remember out of Will Cooley. And I think even though the team crumbled around him, Cooley still had a breakout season, arguably or probably our best player of the year last year. Obviously, you're gonna have Panarin in it. This might be a conversation for another time, but for me, Will Cooley, I think, was one of our best players last year. And I think, how about this? I saw this the other day. He's missed one game in 2 years in his NHL career. That's pretty damn impressive. So I love this deal. I think this is great. And I think this was a deal you had to make, and it's team friendly, and I love it. This is A+. This was something that needed to happen. It's good that it happened, but this is something you had to get done. Yeah, I think, like I said, Cooley's a prime example of what you need moving forward. So A+ all around.
Yeah, listen, Steve McDonald winner. I know that is more of a fan base thing and very subjective, but I do think the fans know that this was a bright spot in a very dark season. He only has now, not, I shouldn't say only, 2 full seasons, 66 points. So I think that's where the contract is fair to me. He earned every penny. I love that he brought it up as far as he could. Like his play really warranted uh that title, that this is the highest paid contract in the salary cap era for the Rangers for a forward in their second deal, and I think he's earned every penny.
Mm-hmm.
He's proven what a lot of those first rounders couldn't, that were forwards, even to an extent Lafreniere, who took 4 seasons to finally kind of hit his stride and then regressed a little bit this year after he got the bag. So yeah, I Cooley signing, he's a major piece, and now he's a top sixer, I think, on this team.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where Sullivan envisions him, in this lineup because, like you said, it's really hard to imagine that Will Cooley, as emerging as he is, that he won't be in the top six. He could easily, be on the left of JT Miller and Zibanejad for sure. So I
Mhm.
mean, it's very early to be having this conversation, but it's fun. It's I remember last offseason, it's always fun, playing with the lines and, envisioning where players will end up. I remember we were talking about Kako and Hito and where they slotted in the lineup, and it's funny how things pan out. That just goes to show you how you don't know how things are going to pan out. But Will Cooley is going to be a very enticing, slot for Mike Sullivan.
All right, Steve, I don't want to necessarily talk about projected lineup, all those things. I want to touch on them softly. Obviously, we're not going to talk about this like hardcore, but um, Igor Shesterkin's still in goal, right? JT Miller is now a New York Ranger, likely their 1C. Zibanejad likely on his right wing. Still have Panarin, Trocheck. We'll see if they keep that line together. And you have some upgrades. Bottom six, you have a little bit of an upgraded defense. You add Gavrikov. And not because we're going to talk about the rest of the NHL next week, but not compared to the other teams, even in their own division. But like, do you think this New York Rangers team is better off than they were?
Um, I partially give you two answers to this. So I'll say yes because we were so bad last year. And I will say right now, It's too early for me to tell. Is this a better team? Because I also need to know, how are we measuring better? Are we measuring better by making the playoffs? If we make the playoffs and are eliminated in round one, I don't know how much better. Like, what's the bar of better? I don't know if I get specifically
Expectation.
expectation. Okay,
Yeah,
I don't
right.
know if
Like
I could speak to if they're better, but I could say they're certainly in a better position than they were when the season ended, for sure. I think there was a little bit of an uncertainty when the season ended, and I think Jury was able to revive that again, not only in one direction, but in two directions. As in, yes, the Rangers are very much well equipped to contend this year. And I said to you before this epi started, I fully expect them to contend. I'm not thinking wild card. I still think we could get up there as one of the three spots in the Metro. But if things don't pan out, and we saw us send that pick over to Pittsburgh, and things don't pan out, and I still think we're set up nicely for a rebuild with what Drury has done in the moves last year. So I think he's kept both pathways open. One, we don't want to go down, but I think if
yeah.
we have to, I think we're set up nicely to go down that path, and I think we're in a better position. And again, I would say I would lean towards yes. I'm gonna get your answer here in a second, but just having JT Miller for one full year, like, we saw the impact that he was able to make, very smallly on a small scale in the end of the season. But having him for a full season, I think, fleshes this team out. And I think having him from the start, I think it's also what he brings, to the locker room, that I think that mentality, along paired with Mike Sullivan, is going to help this team out. So I would say I would lean towards yes. I don't want that to bite me in the ass as soon as the season starts, but I'll pitch it over to you. Do you think the Rangers are in a better spot now? Are they better?
I've seen a lot of discourse online. Um, some that comes to mind was there was an ex post Johnny put up in response to someone. He posed the question, and someone mentioned he responded about how the Rangers' third line to start last year was Kako, Heedle, Cooley, and how could you argue that that depth line was better than what the Rangers have right now? And I was gonna type, but I was like, you know what? I'll save my breath for now. I want to, talk about it on our show and eventually get there. But sitting on it, what I feel is that from the outside on paper, uh, I would say that argument wins tenfold, right? Especially the way they started the year. But I think that the Rangers issue, which I don't think was solved by free agency alone, but just evolved, was that the top six wasn't performing. Like, to me, did the players the Rangers have depth wise, were they championship caliber? Maybe. We'll never know. That's in the past. You only have today and tomorrow, right? Moving forward with the club. To me, I think that if you look at the depth right now, I question that more than I question the top six now, which I think was almost like the opposite at the point we were at in November, right? In November last year was like Chris Kreider to 50 goal, 39 goal season, 30 goal season, 50 goal season. Where is he? Jacob Trouba started the year okay, and then it was like, oh boy, he really is falling off. Capo Caco was like, gosh, is this really the end of it for 24 as a blue shirt? Like, very quickly, those situations devolved. I mean, we talked about Miller at length in this epi. So I don't know. I have a little bit more confidence, although they're not new names in the top six, just based on the layout. Like, you add Cooley, you infuse Miller, and I think that changed the top six for this team. And
Yeah,
you need that.
yeah, you need it for sure. And I also think, I'm gonna give a little more confidence to myself now, and hopefully you and the listeners here
Okay,
is
Steve.
also. I think there's other pieces that a lot of people, are not thinking about. You're gonna have Will Borgen for a full year. I think what Will Borgen has done last year, I think defensively was great, and there's a lot of potential there. And he was another low key steal that we go back and replay the episode. I was like, who? but he was phenomenal. I think a full
I'll
year with him.
defend myself on that one. That night, I put together a tape of his good, like small but good plays. And I remember I showed you, and I'm like, I'm telling you, man, he's just simple defense. The one thing I want to add to what you said, quick, I don't want to run you off the tracks, brother,
Okay.
is that his deal is gonna it looks like a steal already. The cap's going up. Like second pair D for the rate he's earning at is gonna be very good if he played like we saw this year.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And again, it's just something that a lot of Ranger fans don't see. But I think defensively, I think for a full year, I think that's going to help us out. And also having guys like Edstrom come back. He was having a portion of the season last year. He was having a good run before he got injured and got knocked out. But I think if we could keep these guys in the rotation and we could keep them healthy and full years of Borgen and Miller, I think make this team complete. And these were pieces that we were ultimately missing during that horrible run at the end of November and into December last year. So that gives me a little bit more confidence there. So I'm excited. Is the schedule's not out yet, right? Is it
No, preseason is.
preseason? I saw the preseason, and I was gonna say I wonder who we're gonna play opening night. That'll be interesting.
That will be. Yeah, knowing the Rangers' luck, the Schaefer will. By the way, I love Schaefer's story. I have no hate for him, but love the story about the jersey and they added the signature in the jersey and everything with his mother, and that was great. Can't argue with that. But the Rangers' luck will be they'll play the Islanders, and all these guys they drafted are gonna like go sicko mode on opening night. No, I was gonna add, man. You bring up Edstrom. I think the fourth line is pretty formidable. I think if they're able to stay consistent and stay for a portion of the season, like I think they're legit. And I also think that adds to the Ranger, like just another thing to add that wasn't necessarily a free agent ad, but like having pieces that are going to be steadier will elevate their game indirectly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think our fourth line is very formidable, and I think it's very good compared to other teams. I just don't know, and I said this on last episode. I just don't know, and I don't think anyone's gonna have an answer for this right now. I just don't know if it's part of our winning formula. We've been known to have a really good fourth line, in that 2022 season, and then 2 years later, even uh, a year later against the Devils, we had fourth lines that were better against all the teams that we
Mhm.
were eventually eliminated with. But if you look at those games, the fourth line just didn't get any minutes. When it come down to it, and you're trailing, it's very hard. And I just don't. Yes, the fourth line is so important when you look at it. You look at Florida, but I just for the New York Rangers and the way that we play, I just don't know how much a fourth line when it comes down to it. But listen, I'm going to step back a little bit because that was under Peter Laviolette. Mike Sullivan, it could be a whole different story. So
Yeah, and it's July 2nd, right? Like we
of
still
course,
got time.
yeah, of course. So I'll walk the line back a little bit on that one. But the fourth line, yes, our fourth line is very good, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I honestly think the questionable spots on this team after free agency, after the draft, are your second lefty is Susie. Now, I am in the rare field where I just have a blind optimism that he can at least be serviceable for a portion of the year. Okay. We don't even have to get into predictions with that. I would say third lefty, Vakanainen, because I mean, your righty is Foxborg and Schneider. That's deep as it comes. And then I think your third line, like right now, it projects. By the way, Radish acquisition. You had a great thought before we hopped on, so we'll get there. Your third line would be Berard, Parsonen, or Othman. I'm assuming Radish maybe gets that right wing spot for Othman, right? But then do Perot and Othman, are they on the roster? Are they playing in Hartford? It's every report I've seen is that Drury wants these guys to be competitive, so he might start Perot in the American League. But those are the holes to me. The third line and your two lefty spots after Gavrikov, which obviously are going to need some work because every team wants to emulate what Florida's doing.
Yeah. Eh, It's listen, it's early, like you said, to have these conversations because
Early.
2 years ago nobody saw Will Cooley, and the fight that he had to get into that lineup, and make the team, and something like that could happen. As of July 2nd, I would sit here and agree exactly what you said. I'd be okay with Perot not starting. Altman, I think, is a guy that has to be in there, and I think Parsonen, I have no confidence in him. He's not a guy I want to see somebody in the. He's not
No.
a guy I want to
The
see in the.
3C market was bad though. Like Christian Dvorak, great signing. I like the signing by the Flyers. Like some people talked about the cap hit. It's a 1 year deal. It's a prove it deal, and you needed a 3C. The Flyers made a lot of moves, and they needed to for their situation. The Rangers, though, I just didn't feel like there was a third line center market. And unfortunately, like that's what can happen, right? Like you're just kind of stuck, you're stuck with what you got right now. But again, the smart move with the conditional that you picked up from Carolina is that if you're contending, you can use that draft choice to acquire a player of need.
Exactly.
And that could be a third line center. That could be a second pairing lefty. Like, and if you're not doing well in the season, that conditional first, now you have 2 first round picks
Yeah.
in the Gavin McKenna draft. You just never know what can happen.
Exactly. And you could use that pick maybe at the deadline and say, you know what, right now, jury is not done. We'll evaluate what goes on in the season and we'll pick up what we can. At the deadline, it all depends on how this team meshes, and they're kind of going to play it by year. But I also would agree with you. Defensively, when it comes to Vakanainen and Susi, I need having both of them in there again. I don't have it's. I think it's okay to have one, but yeah, it's tough. It really is tough. If we
But then
can.
again, again, the question mark of like you and I can go on the carousel all day of like question marks because Mike Sullivan and his coaching staff, a rising tide lifts all ships. Arthur Staples said that to us last year. And I agreed. He didn't think Braden Schneider had a great year. I did, right? Two opposite views, but we came to the same conclusion that this team is winning the President's Trophy and setting the club record in wins. Like, no player is playing bad when the team is performing this well. And I do feel like Susi Vakanainen, right now, on paper, what we saw, not very good. But what if there is some blind confidence to start the year? They start the year off well. Like, who knows what that can lead to? And I know obviously that's just projecting into the future, but and then
Yeah,
again,
you're
maybe
right.
that's contradictory to everything we said about Keandre Miller, too. What we've seen versus what potential is.
I have to take this time to say rip Zach Jones and also rip us because we spent a lot of time. Uh, I don't want to say praising, but we were high on Zach Jones to start the season last year, and rip
Yeah.
rip Zach Jones. It didn't work out for him, so hopefully,
And he
hopefully
was a good guy.
he
He
was a
really
good
earned
guy.
his strike. He worked real hard.
He did,
He
and
worked real hard.
opportunity wasn't there, and opportunity was there, and he just couldn't seize it. And then he just, was taken out, and you gotta feel bad for him. He wasn't given an opportunity again. Tough situation. Really, nothing you could do there. But hopefully, we're not in the same situation. I listen. I think me. I'm not a Vakanainen fan, but I think you start the year with Vakanainen. I don't think you have another solid option. Susie's the one. I don't want to see him in the lineup. Is he serviceable? Yes, he is. But even watching him at the end of last year, he looked like there was nothing in the tank there.
But isn't it fair though the verdict on the Rangers, and this is every move we mentioned today. This statement applies to the verdict on the New York Rangers was last year and complete just disaster from top to bottom, and this is who these players are, or is it we can see change? And I think that applies to everybody. Kako saw change. Chris Kreider, how does he do in Anaheim? Because I think that the way he performed last year is kind of what Anaheim's getting. Maybe a little bit better. Same deal. Keandre Miller, was this year an outlier for him? Can he reach that potential and turn it into kinetic, become what we think he is? Or is he what he is? Is he what we thought he is? So I think that applies to every single person. Like, I agree with you. I really could see Susie being a major wart on this roster, but I also could see, like, team starts performing well. Does he start performing well? Does he get that support from Borgen and he's a little more comfortable, right? Like, all question marks. But at the end of the day, Steve, I want to hear your final thoughts. Free agency. The only two players out, now granted, all year this team made moves, but Kreider and Miller were the only two out this summer. Gavrikov, Morrow, Terrence, Dowling, the first round pick and the second round pick for 2026 come in from Carolina. On paper, that's the assessment. We went through all the more subjective aspects of the moves too, but final thoughts on the Rangers free agency for now.
Yeah, I think it's again, jury's still out on it, and I want to talk about a guy that we didn't talk mention about. I think a under the radar guy could be Taylor Radish. I think
Mhm.
I think he's a great move for us. I honestly do. If for those of you listening and don't know, he was part of the package that Tampa sent to Chicago to get Brandon Hagel, and he spent a lot of time playing on the penalty kill for the Blackhawks. And he was then signed by the Capitals, and he had a solid season last year, all around. So I think if he could channel that, and he's a under the radar kind of quiet guy. I said this to Matt before the epi, but I would expect him to fill a similar role that Jimmy Vesey had with us in the last couple of years. But I think that he could be even better. He's a well trusted player. He's hardworking. He's got offensive skill sets. I think he's perfect for a bottom six duty. But not only that, he's much more bigger. He's much more physical, and I think that's an element. He's basically a taller, more physical version of Jimmy Vesey, and I think that is something that I'm curious. I want to tap in. I want to see if Mike Sullivan can tap into that a little bit. On the bottom of the sixth lineup. Listen, I'm not saying he's gonna start the year first, but I like the sense, like you said, a little sense of competitiveness there, competitiveness in the bottom. And I think if we want to have guys fight out for a bottom six role, I'm totally fine with it. And I think Radish is a guy that if there's an injury or you need to move guys in and out of the lineup, they're not playing well, I think he's a perfect player, and I think he brings every physical element to a lineup that you would want out of somebody in a bottom six role. So I think this is a move that to watch out. It's not just we're signing some scrub. There could be something there. I'm not saying that this is going to be 30 goals season, 50 points. But there's something there. I want to get your thoughts on this. Yeah, since we haven't talked about it.
Yeah, in the big picture, I think it fits into what they're looking for perfectly, and it's kind of that culture change. I think the on ice style change that jury and the management's looking for, the organization's looking for. So I like the move. From what I've heard, again, like Steve and I, we watch as much hockey as we can. We don't have the notebook on every player, but from everything I've seen, it's that he struggles to finish. But listen, if that's the verdict and you're getting a player with NHL experience who's been on teams that were competitive, been on teams that were not competitive, like, he's seen it. And I think that helps to add a player at his, sub 2 mil for a team that really needs that in the lineup. Like, you plug that in, and now do you worry about Berard? You give Berard more time to develop, and these players don't have to take on 82 game seasons, right? Like, now you have a guy that's got experience and you could plug in the lineup. So I like the move. I think at the start of the day for free agency, the worry for the fan base was, if you can't get Gavrikov, is that it? and you end up basically trading Miller for Gavrikov. That's how I see it. And you didn't get offer sheeted for Miller. Like a lot went the Rangers' way, and I didn't expect that just based on the season and based on how some of the past off seasons have gone. Um, but this was different. This July 1st was different. I think they turned was a very mediocre day overall into like a small victory, and that goes a long way for this club at this stage.
Yeah, and you could correct me if I'm wrong. I wasn't looking at it, that intensely, but it just wasn't. Even when free agency started, there just wasn't a lot of rumblings. Usually you could hear things on the rumor mill of when something's coming. I think that's what a lot of Ranger fans were worried about. I think I know you were looking into it more intensely. Like if you before we end here, if you want to give us like a last minute blurb on that part, but I think that's what worried a lot of Ranger fans, and I think now a couple of days later, I think Ranger fans should be satisfied. I think we made a lot of moves that make sense compared to our competitors, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Um, you know what? The reality is you really have to focus on yourself, right? Like, yes, it's competitive, it's a competitive market, but the Rangers, they had to step into the position and do the best they could. And I think they did based on the hand they had, right? Like, you're at the card table, some card games, you don't get to pick up some new additions all the time. You just got to play with the hand you're dealt. And I think for the position they were in, Drury made moves. I think the Miller deal really came out of nowhere. And I think what was good was you didn't lose him to free agency. He did a sign and trade, and you traded in division, and that's a huge gamble. But I think for the return, you're very happy because the arguments online today were about NYR Marine brought this up on Morning Cup of Hockey. He said, was the Miller return better than the Dobson return? And I think that if that question for most level headed hockey observers is something that you can debate, I think that goes a long way because I don't think Keandre Miller is half the player Noah Dobson is.
Oh yeah, for sure. But just the fact that it's being raised,
Exactly.
raises an eyebrow. It's up to interpretation. I like that. I love that card analogy too. That was we know your money with those analogies. So that was a good one.
Maybe you and I think so. I know not everyone thinks so. But yeah, Steve, it's so funny. I also feel like this team came in and they made so many moves during the year that yeah, they made moves, which was great, but like I also didn't fully expect it because they overhauled so much of this team in 12 months.
They did, but if you look at the two main pieces that we lost this offseason, Chris Kreider and Keandre Miller, and they were two players that didn't make a huge impact last season. And it was okay, you ready to roll the dice, again for another full season. And if you get the same performance that you did last year, this upcoming year, it's just the results are not going to be positive, and that's kind of, it's bringing that stale. I hate it. I don't want to say because Chris Kreider is a legend, but it's bringing that stale, mentality of last year's disgusting season and kind of bringing it into this year. And I think what we're trying to do is nip that in the bud and bring Sullivan in and start fresh. And I think that's kind of what I'm seeing right now is the writing on the wall. So if you're a New York Ranger fan, I think you're encouraged. You are optimistic of the future, and I still think that you should be positive. I think that sums everything up with a nice bow. I don't expect there to be other major moves. And people are sitting there with big dreams for next year. We're not even gonna have a conversation about that right now. But I'm not talking about this upcoming season. I'm talking about next off season. But that is for me. That
Oh.
is that is not a conversation for right now. But I think the main moves for Drury, I think right now are done, and you might see a little bit more minor ads here and there, but this is again the core is still here. Artemi Panarin, Vinny T, JT Miller, Mika Zibanejad, Fox, and Shesterkin. That's the New York team. That's the New York Rangers team right there, and they're going to go as far as that they take the Rangers. The Rangers will go as far as they perform, and they did not perform
Yes,
last year.
Steve-O, the
So
Rangers will go as far as the Rangers go, my man. I'll tell
that's the
you,
truth.
you know what, Steve? The thing to me is you if you're in a good enough position for a wild card, like you have Igor Shesterkin. The unfortunate thing was they were so bad last year, they were only 6 points out. Yet it felt like Igor couldn't overcome that. But I feel like if you're even in striking distance of a wild card team, man, I'm taking 31 over any other team
Any day of the week. Come on now.
any day of the week.
Not that's not even a question. I don't even think.
Right?
I think that it shouldn't be a debate for sure.
All
So
right, my man Steve-O. Next epi, we're doing some NHL full recap. I'm sure we'll touch on the Rangers too. Obviously, that's our listening base. So we're of course going to be talking New York Rangers, but we want to talk about the Rangers in relation to the rest of the NHL. What was the rest of the NHL up to? At that point, I'm sure you got your fill of NHL stuff, but um, you know, we want to talk about our opinion, share some thoughts, maybe some viewpoints that weren't talked about enough, opinions, and then we move forward. We didn't get to talk much about the draft, and summer content is going to be flying because even though it's like that lull of the year, there's always something to talk about, especially with this team.
of course, and you know how these days fly now. Today we are at the midpoint of the year. We're 2025, so that means we are officially closer to 2050 than 22,000, bro. You sent this to me earlier, and I could not believe that. So time
Yeah.
flies, and before you know it, we'll be dropping the puck on a new season of New York Rangers hockey. So I cannot wait with all the excitement that this offseason will bring for New York Rangers hockey. So stay tuned to Puck Talk CS, and always remember, it's just the luck of the puck.